Check, check, check. You guys hearing me now? Guys, I'm not muted. Good Lord. All right. All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today we have a special stream. A major shout out goes out to Leon for sponsoring today's great topic. We'll be diving into the life and legacy of one of the most important saints in Christianity, St. Constantine the Great. And obviously, most of us are going to be a little bit familiar with St. Constantine's life and legacy. And most notorious is that he defeated the enemy at the Milvian Bridge. Arguably, we talked about this at Pascha, actually. Somebody asked me, what do you think is the most important battle in history? And I sat there and thought about it. And then my argument was the battle at the Milvian Bridge. And this is the battle that St. Constantine defeats his enemy and essentially is able to establish the Edict of Milan in 313, which legalizes Christianity for the first time. It isn't until Theodorus I, who we have the Edict of Thessalonica, or Thessaloniki, in which establishes Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire. So St. Constantine arguably is the first Christian. I mean, he is the first Christian emperor. It's debated on when actually he was baptized. So typically we're told that he was baptized right before he died. And just kind of looking through the sources for today's stream, I'm curious what, it seemed like there was, even on the Ortho Wiki, it called into question some of the legends regarding Constantine the Great's baptism because of the forgery of the donation of Constantine. This is a document that was actually deemed a forgery in the 15th century. But much of the legends we have of St. Constantine come from this document. And, it claims that he was actually being plagued with leprosy. And upon being baptized by Eusebius, who, his orthodoxy is a little bit in question. He kind of adhered to some Arius doctrines and theological positions. But it's believed that, at least there's a legend that now is called into question, that Constantine, after baptism, he was healed of his leprosy and never wore his imperial garments after his baptism, but wore his baptismal cloth until the day that he died. Interesting. Now, I also found some legends coming out of Greece and the Slavic Orthodox traditions that actually argue that St. Constantine's mother, St. Helena, or St. Helen, that she actually catechized Constantine at a young age, and that he was a sort of crypto-Christian even while working in the imperial court of Diocletian. Now, Diocletian, famous Roman emperor who persecuted Christians. In fact, I put a little list together of some of the notorious saints, the martyrs that died under Diocletian. Now, imagine this: the first Christian emperor of the Roman Empire has a peasant mother who actually raises him. We're going to get into his life and legacy. It's absolutely fascinating. Constantine was raised by a single peasant mother who, around the age, I was trying to find the exact age, nobody knows for certain, anywhere between 14 years old and 17 years old. She was working at an inn, and one of the, if you're familiar with the tetrarchy of the Roman Empire, when Diocletian divided it basically into 4 regions. And we're going to get into all this stuff, but the gentleman that controlled the western portion, Flavius Constantius, who is the biological father of St. Constantine, he requests the company of a woman while staying at one of these inns, and it is St. Helena, who then is accommodating him, and she then becomes pregnant, and he leaves one of his garments with her as proof that of his presence. And of course, she gets pregnant. She gives birth to Constantine, and Flavius Constantius doesn't even know that he has a son for like 10 years. He's raised by his single mother, Helena, and according to some of these Greek and Slavic legends, they claim that she was already a Christian and she was already sort of catechizing him at a young age. Now, what we typically understand is that eventually, around the age of 10 years old or 12 years old, Constantine, some Roman soldiers came to the inn that him and his mother were living at, and he started messing around with some of the horses, and some of the Roman soldiers got really annoyed with him, and he was just a little boy, and they started to actually beat him and harass him, and his mother comes out and basically says, "Don't you know who his father is? He's the governor." And they're laughing, of course he is, right? And then she brings out one of his garments with his initials on it, proving that in some way or another she got access to one of these I don't know if it's like a nightgown or something from Constantius, and then the Roman soldiers are stunned. Well, eventually then she brings the awareness of the son to Constantius, and he adopts, not adopts, but brings them in and goes ahead and marries Helena, which she was a peasant woman. This is not very common. Now, as his career goes forward, Constantius realizes he actually needs to marry someone of a little higher up. So Helena and Constantine go from poverty, being peasants, living at an inn, then being brought into luxury and royalty. She's married to Constantius. He then divorces her, but he doesn't give up on his son or now his ex-wife. He does it really for political and career purposes. But moves Helena and Constantine to the imperial court of Diocletian. And he is famous for persecuting these Christians, such as Saint George, the great martyr, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, Saint Demetrius of Thessaloniki, Saint Cosmas and Damian, the twin brother physicians. All these great martyrs are killed under Diocletian. Saint Anastasia, Saint Euphemia, the all praised. And so Constantine, what we're told is that Helena begins to convert to Christianity after the divorce from Constantius. And meanwhile, she's living near her son, who's living and working in the imperial court of Diocletian, who's persecuting Christians throughout the entire empire. And the irony is remarkable, right? What a paradox. And it's believed that Constantine, seeing the persecution of Christians and witnessing the conversion of his mother, sort of harbored all these feelings inside. And many speculate when Helena actually converted to Christianity. Maybe it was earlier. Maybe Constantine was already aware of it. And some of the legends, and I have some of these legends we'll go through, at least according to the Greeks and the Slavs, they believe that Constantine already was aware of the Christian God and felt a calling. And throughout his later life, after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, he believes that he is called by Christ to establish this new kingdom. And that's what he does. I mean, arguably the most important battle, at least if you're a Christian, the Battle of the Milvian Bridge totally changes history. The Edict of Milan legalizes Christianity for the first time in the Roman Empire. It's St. Constantine the Great that organizes the Council of Nicaea to do away with the Arian heresy. It's St. Constantine the Great who decides to move the capital from Rome to the new Rome, Constantinople, which was Byzantium, and create the new Christian Roman Empire. It's his mother, St. Helena, who's actually credited with finding the true cross of Christ in the Holy Land. So when Constantine eventually decides to build Constantinople, he's over in that area, and he gives his mother a sort of entourage to go to the Holy Land, and she establishes the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. She finds the true cross. She establishes multiple other churches and monasteries in the Holy Land. So his mother and St. Constantine are incredible, incredible saints that, as we go through today's stream, it's a powerful message, and it's an irony. Like, for example, we're going to talk about how St. Constantine, eventually he marries a peasant girl. Her name's what was it? Ravina or something like that. Anyways, we'll find out here in a few. She was a peasant girl just like his mother. Now, this man is working in the imperial court. He has high status. Of course, once Constantius married his mother for a brief period, he was educated, highly educated in military tactics. And marries this peasant girl, gives birth to his first son, Chrysippus. Eventually, she dies in childbirth. Eventually, Constantine then remarries one of the other emperor's daughters. And at one point, Chrysippus is essentially, he's a grown man now. He's in his 20s. He is the right-hand man of his father, Constantine. And he wants to celebrate Chrysippus and all the work he's done. So they go to organize essentially a celebration, a festival, a party for him in Rome. But his new wife, his second wife, who is not the biological mother of Chrysippus, is jealous and sees that Constantine has so much faith and love for his son that he's going to be the next one appointed. He's going to be the next emperor. And so she then lies and claims that Chrysippus was essentially sexually harassing her and putting the moves on her, convinces Constantine of this. Constantine arrests his son. And before he's able to interrogate his son about the incident, his wife, she forges documents for the execution of Constantine's first son, kills him. Constantine is furious. He finds out that his wife was responsible for killing his firstborn son, the one that they're in Rome to celebrate. And so he then tortures her and in turn basically places her body in boiling hot water in Rome until she dies. So pretty tragic way to die. So Constantine is a man of many ironies. But one of the things, and one of the reasons why he's considered equal to the apostles is because of the historical importance in spreading the Christian faith Constantine plays in our history. So he is one of the few saints that is credited with being equal to the apostles. And I know some detractors will say, oh, but he wasn't even Christian until right at the end of his life, seeing the Chiro sign before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge and Christ telling him that you will conquer in this sign. He still wasn't Christian. It was just pragmatic. It was just political. And really, he was never a believer. But I feel, based on the research I did for today's stream, I feel very confident in saying that Constantine, especially after his vision before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge and after, truly believed himself to be the voice for the spreading and the establishing of a Christian empire. And when you look into the history of the building of Constantinople, it is quite clear. I mean, literally the dedication service that they had, which was on May 11th, I think it was we'll find out. I have the date in one of the documents. It's 320 something. And anyways, they use Christian hymns, Christian prayers. The entire Constantinople is dedicated through Christian ceremony. It is clear that his goal was to create a new Rome, a Christian Rome, and to spread Christianity. And I don't think this was pragmatic or just political. I think it was truly heartfelt. So anyways, we're going to get into all this stuff. Very, very fascinating, man. So smash that like. Turbo Diesel throws in 20. Thank you so much, Turbo Diesel. He says, Christ is risen. Truly, he is risen. I've been told St. Constantine was quite a strong man. He was, definitely. Absolutely. And one of the things, because I have a whole video section today talking about the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, because I do believe it's one of the most important battles in history. Constantine was notorious for riding, again, he was in the cavalry, so he's riding his horse. He would lead the front line in battle, and he did this throughout his military career. So truly a providential figure. One, he never died in battle, conquered, was incredibly successful. So yeah, he was definitely a strong man. Anyways, Turbo Diesel says, so I have his icon in my home gym, exact same one as in your thumbnail. Well, glory to God, Turbo Diesel. I think everybody watching, every man watching at least, by the end of this stream, you will revere St. Constantine. Now, he is a man of interesting paradoxes and ironies, but the fact that he was a strong, masculine Christian emperor with the vision to dedicate his life to Christ. And according to some of the Orthodox priests, we'll be watching a documentary clip. It's about 30 minutes. According to them, they do believe that when he was baptized, so they believe he was baptized towards the end of his life, which is generally, again, it comes from a forged document, the donation of Constantine. But they argue and they believe that he did, in fact, only wear his baptismal garment until basically he lived a few more weeks. I can't get an exact date on when his baptism was compared to when his death. So maybe some of you guys out there know something or found some sources that I couldn't find. But they believe that he apparently said before dying that being baptized a Christian was so important to him. And one of the reasons, according to them, why he waited till the end of his life was not because he was never a true believer. He waited till the end of his life because apparently in the ancient world, with some of the pagans that were converting to Christianity, because of the belief that baptism was the true cleansing of the soul and cleansing of human sin, they wanted to wait till closer toward the end of their life so that they could get baptized so they wouldn't taint themselves too much before death. That was apparently a common understanding. And so, according to some of the Orthodox priests that we'll watch today, they believe that's one of the reasons why he waited so long. But according to them, Constantine made the statement, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially, baptism was so important to him that he would rather give up his entire empire as emperor to be baptized before death. And so fortunately he didn't have to give up his empire, but he was baptized, it sounds like at least a month before his death, because according to the Orthodox priest, he was a newly illumined. So he was technically newly illuminated. So, usually we use that term for the first 3 Sundays after somebody's been baptized. So I'm not sure exactly when his baptism was compared to his death, but relatively close to each other. So thank you so much, Turbo Diesel. And Kevin throws in 10. Thank you so much, Kevin. He says, glory to Jesus Christ and all his beloved ones. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. Really appreciate that, my man. So before we get into all the videos, I just want to kind of cover a little bit in a more systematic approach to the life and legacy of St. Constantine the Great. So first things first, early life and rise to power. So he's born 272 AD in what we consider modern day Serbia, which is very interesting because he spends a lot of time what we would consider in Western Europe. And it's actually, well, we'll get into it, but upon Constantius dying, who was a great military leader, his father, who married his mother briefly, Helen, a great military leader, and what we would consider modern day York, England, so way out on the western fringe of the Roman Empire, up in Britain, he dies, and his soldiers are so devout to Constantine's father, Constantius, that they then put the imperial robe on Constantine, and on that night declare him emperor of Rome. And that's essentially the first domino of him then becoming emperor and converting the empire and all that stuff. But anyways, okay. Parents, his father, Constantius, was a Roman military officer and Caesar and the tetrarchy under Diocletian. His mother, St. Helena, was a woman of humble origins. We talked about that. Later canonized as a saint in her own right. Raised at the court of Diocletian and Galerius, Constantine was well-educated and trained in military affairs. Again, what I would argue, I'd be curious what you guys think. What do you think is the most important military battle in history? It's got to be, if you're Christian, it's got to be elite. The Milvian Bridge has to be in the top 3. And so this is in 312. So after his father's death in 306, Constantine was proclaimed emperor by his troops in York, Britain. The empire was in chaos with competing emperors, particularly Maxentius in the west. Prior to the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine reportedly had a vision of a cross of light in the sky with the words, "In this sign you will conquer." And we're told it was, some believe it was the cross, some believe it was the Chi-Rho. But anyways, that night, Christ appeared to him in a dream and told him to use the Chi-Rho as the standard in battle. Constantine defeated then Maxentius, who drowned in the Tiber River. This victory marked a turning point in history as Constantine attributed his triumph to the Christian God. And really from that point forward, at no point did I find in my research Constantine ever turning his back on Christianity or mocking of Christ or anything like that. From my research, it seems like he was a devout believer and defender of Christ after his battle of the Milvian Bridge and after this experience he had. So after this battle, a year later, then he establishes the Edict of Milan. Together with Licinius, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, which guaranteed religious tolerance throughout the empire, effectively ending the brutal persecution of Christians. This edict legalized Christianity and restored confiscated church property and established the principle of freedom of religion. Consolidation of power and sole rule. Constantine then later defeats Licinius in 324. And Licinius, Edict of Milan 313, this legalizes Christianity, right? Well, Licinius then eventually goes back and starts persecuting Christians around the 320s. Constantine gets word of this, that he's actually persecuting and killing Christians en masse again. And then he marches from Western Rome to Eastern Rome, Constantinople, in that area, Anatolia, and goes to battle with Licinius and defeats him in battle, becoming the sole ruler of the Roman Empire. He moved the imperial capital from Rome to Byzantium, which he rebuilt and renamed Constantinople, dedicated in 330 AD. It would become the new Rome, the Christian capital of the Byzantine Empire for over 1,000 years, the longest single empire in history. The first ecumenical council, 325 AD, concerned about division of the church, Constantine convened the first ecumenical council. He played a central role in supporting the Nicene Creed, which affirmed the full divinity of Jesus Christ against the Arian heresy, which denied Christ's divine nature. Though not a bishop or a theologian, Constantine insisted on unity and doctrine and was deeply invested in the health of the church. Baptism and death. Constantine delayed baptism until his final illness, which, as I highlighted, which was not uncommon at the time. A lot of people actually waited to be baptized so that they wouldn't be tainted with sin. At least that was their belief. So baptized by Eusebius of Nicomedia. Again, Eusebius had some Arian leanings. That's one of the reasons he's not a saint in our church, and partly why, according to the donation of Constantine, calls into question the veracity of Constantine's conversion, because, well, the bishop that converted him was kind of Arian, and anyways. He died near Nicomedia and was buried in the Church of the Holy Apostles in Constantinople. His importance and legacy: patron of the church, the end of Christian persecution. Essentially, martyrdom ceased after he gave Christianity a sort of privileged status. Now, technically, it wasn't totally privileged until the Edict of Thessaloniki, or the Edict of Thessalonica, but certainly it ceased a lot of the killing and the persecution. He is the builder of the Christian empire. Constantine established the Byzantine Empire. He founded Constantinople, not merely as a political capital, but explicitly as a Christian city, adorned with churches rather than pagan temples. In fact, he when they built Constantinople, they pulled down any of the pagan statues or temples in the area, or reconsecrated them to Christianity. His architectural legacy includes the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which again was technically founded by his mother, who claims that that's where she found the true cross of Christ. St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, the original structure, and many, many others. Helena in the Holy Land. Constantine empowered his mother, St. Helena, to travel to the Holy Land. She is credited with discovering the true cross, the founding of the Church of the Nativity, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This act sacralized geography. This is what I found regarding the importance and some of the shifts here. It began Christianizing the Roman view of space and time, because it was connecting Christ and the rebuilding of the new Christian empire together. Champion of Orthodox theology through his understanding though his understanding was limited, Constantine recognized the importance of orthodoxy of faith. His role in convening the Council of Nicaea shaped the creedal foundation of the Orthodox Church, and the Nicene Creed remains the foundational confession of all Orthodox Christians. The Symphonia of State and Church. Constantine introduced the ideal symphonia, the harmonious cooperation between imperial authority and ecclesiastical authority. This concept would shape Orthodox Christian political theology for centuries. And I'm currently reading a book. Let me grab it for you. Some of you guys may have already read this. It's called The History of the Byzantine State by, what's his name? Ostrogorsky. So this is considered one of the best historical overviews of Byzantium. It's actually a really good read for anybody who, here, let me pull this down. So The History of the Byzantine State by Ostro Gorsky. Shout out to Jose. Everybody knows Jose from the open panels. He's the one that actually recommended this book. And so I'm currently trying to work through it, but it actually brings up the symphonia that Constantine established here. And it argues that basically for the first 300 years, the imperial authority still kind of held a kind of dominance over the church. But as soon as Byzantium essentially enters the Middle Ages, the church is of total equal authority, and in multiple instances actually has authority over the imperium itself. So, interesting little thing. But if you're interested in this topic or want to learn more about Byzantium and Byzantine history, check out that book. I really have no complaints so far. It's very, very academic and very scholarly. So anyways, moving on here. St. Constantine and Orthodox spirituality, again, saint, equal to the apostles due to the importance of him in Christian history. Feast day, May 21st. So you guys can celebrate the feast of St. Constantine next month. That in the dedication to, it's in here in one of these notes, the dedication to Constantinople is also May 11th. So that's coming up really soon. Let's see, here's a general timeline. Again, this document, these show notes, I'm going to send them to Leon. Major shout out to Leon for sponsoring today's stream. If you want, I'm not going to go over the whole timeline here of his life, but I put a little bit together. So if you guys are interested in this document will be available for all the website members. But anyways, regarding the council, right? Because some of the most important events in Christian history are responsible by St. Constantine. As I said, Battle at the Milvian Bridge, the Edict of Milan, the Council of Nicaea, the building of Constantinople, the building of, many of the historical churches that are still present today. So during the 4th century, the early 4th century, the church faced the theological crisis as Arianism. So Arius, a priest from Alexandria, was teaching that Christ was not co-eternal with the Father, but a created being, an exalted creature, superior to men, but inferior to God. And obviously this would deny the full divinity of Jesus Christ and the salvific work of healing human nature and his hypostatization. The controversy spread rapidly, even causing riots in cities. And therefore, it was not just a theological dispute, although it was, absolutely. And Constantine wanted the church to figure this out. It wanted to be unified. But Arianism was actually a threat to the social and political order as well. And so Constantine, having recently established relative peace in the empire and favoring the church, saw division within the church as a direct threat to the unity of his empire, and therefore wanted to convene a universal council. So what was his actions during the council? I was trying to figure out, what role did Constantine play during the Council of Nicaea? So summoning and organizing the council, he personally called the council in 325 and paid for the travel expenses and lodging of over 300 bishops. The council was held at Nicaea, modern-day Iznik, Turkey, strategically located near Constantinople. Role during the proceedings, Constantine opened the council with the formal address. According to church historian Eusebius, Constantine entered the council humbly, wearing imperial robes adorned with precious stones, but maintaining a tone of deference to the bishops. In his opening speech, he emphasized the importance of unity in the church, his desire to resolve the fratricidal strife among Christians, the need to heal the church so that the empire could remain strong under the favor of the Christian God. Constantine was not a voting member of the council, despite conspiracy theorists arguing he put the Bible together. Constantine put the Bible together? This kind of low IQ stuff. He did not act as a theologian or a bishop. His role was more of a presider and protector, ensuring order, encouraging consensus, and urging the bishops towards peace. He respected the authority of the bishops, but exerted influence when discussions became too heated or prolonged. Mediation and personal influence. He personally mediated between parties. Though initially hoped for compromise, he ultimately supported the Orthodox party led by St. Alexander of Alexandria and St. Athanasius the Great, of course. And Constantine realized that Arianism posed a danger to Christian orthodoxy and thus to the unity of his empire. Outcomes, influence, obviously, they changed. The creed was established, original form, affirming that Christ is begotten, not made, of one essence with the Father. So this was a condemnation of Arianism. And Constantine reinforced, again, through imperial enforcement, he issued imperial decrees giving civil enforcement to the decisions of the council. Those who refused to accept the Nicene Creed could be banished. Heretical works were to be destroyed on sight. Thus, Constantine was among the first emperors to tie imperial authority to the defense of Orthodox doctrine, a model that would influence Byzantine Christian emperorship for centuries. And so some of his complex positions, it highlights what I said earlier. He kind of, he was soft. Obviously, he had a fondness for Eusebius, who held some Arian controversial opinions and such. But his role at the council, he was a summoner, he was the protector, he was the mediator, he was the supporter. And then once they came to the conclusion, he was the enforcer of the Nicene faith. Why did Constantine build Constantinople? Well, one, Rome was declining. We actually did a whole stream on the collapse of Western Rome. And by the early 4th century, old Rome was bloated, corrupt, and deeply pagan. The Roman Senate still favored pagan aristocracy and old traditions. Rome was geographically far from the eastern frontier, where most military threats, Persians and Gauls, were emerging. The East was wealthier and more vital than Western Rome. The eastern provinces, Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, were richer, more urbanized, and more Christianized. Moving east would align the empire closer to the economic and military heart of its survival. Better defensibility. Byzantium, and I'll show you guys it's actually the History Channel. They don't make much good content, but they do have a fabulous video on YouTube on the construction of Constantinople. It's really good. I'll share that link with you guys here in a bit. But it aligned the empire closer to the economic and military heart. Better defense, that's where I was. It was ideally located. It controlled the Bosphorus Strait, the waterway connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. Easily fortified. It sat at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, essential for trade. And part of the reasons why it became so wealthy is so much trade from the Silk Road, trade moving basically from east to west. A lot of it came through Constantinople. And so his goal was to create a Christian city. Constantine dreamed of building a new capital free from the deep paganism of old Rome. He wanted a city that would reflect the victory of Christ in the Christian faith. Instead of being filled with temples of Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, Constantinople will be adorned with only churches dedicated to Christ, Theotokos, and to the saints. He wanted to Christianize the empire. By founding the new Rome centered around Christian worship, Constantine was baptizing the Roman Empire itself. And his intention was for it to be a visible sign of the transformation of the Roman world under Christ's kingship. So obviously legacy and part of his sacred mission were involved there. And so anyways, a very interesting story. We won't be able to see it, but it's in the History Channel documentary regarding Constantine. Is when he chose Byzantium to build the city, apparently he himself went out. Here it is. He personally supervised the expansion, but he redrew the boundaries. Apparently, he walked around the entire perimeter himself of the city, dramatically extending them far beyond the old wall to accommodate future growth. He had this incredible vision. People were actually blown away by how big he wanted to make the city. According to tradition, Constantine himself walked the perimeter of the new city's limits, carrying a spear to define its sacred boundaries, seeing himself as guided by divine inspiration, which he said multiple times. He believed that he was guided by Christ throughout his imperial reign, and then building the Christian identity of the city, all that stuff. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Lesser known stories and legends about Constantine the Great. These were some that I found very interesting. Again, cannot confirm much of the veracity of these things. These were just things that I came across, thought they'd be interesting to share with you guys. So here's some lesser known stories. The legend of the leprous Constantine. As I said, this really comes from the donation of Constantine, which we know is a forgery, so it's already called into question. But in some Eastern traditions, it said that Constantine suffered from leprosy in his final years. According to the story, Constantine initially consulted pagan priests who advised him to bathe in the blood of children to be healed. Now, we don't know if this is totally true, but this is at least the legend, the story. I just wanted to share some stories with you. Horrified at the prospect of such a massacre, Constantine refused to bathe in the blood of children. That night, he had a vision from St. Peter and Paul, instructing him to seek Christian baptism instead. After baptism, his leprosy vanished immediately, symbolizing the healing power of Christ and the cleansing of his soul. This story, though embellished, reflects Constantine's great repentance and the sacramental importance of baptism. We already know, and we're going to hear more about his vision of the Chi Rho. That plays a central part in some of the videos today. This is the one that I found, the legend of the secret Christian Constantine. So according to some Byzantine and Slavic traditions, they hold that Constantine was actually secretly a Christian even before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. According to this view, his mother, St. Helena, secretly catechized him in the Christian faith during his youth, and this would explain the instant devotion to Christ after the Milvian Bridge and his consistent favoring of Christians even early in his reign. So is it true? Not sure, but there is a historical legend and theory that maybe he was Christian well beyond when we were told that he was, or even his vision. The dream to found Constantinople, according to Byzantine chroniclers, Constantine had a dream in which an angel commanded him to build a city that would be the new Jerusalem on earth. Originally, Constantine planned to rebuild Troy, but the angel directed him to Byzantium. The angel's guidance confirmed that Constantinople was not merely a political foundation, but a sacred destiny. The 12 apostles and Constantine's burial. At his death, Constantine was buried at the Church of the Holy Apostles in Constantinople. In a powerful and symbolic act, his tomb was placed among 12 empty sarcophagi, one for each apostle. Legend says that Constantine saw himself as the 13th apostle, not in arrogance, but in gratitude for his role in spreading the faith and protecting the church. Some traditions even claim that miraculous signs accompanied his burial, lights appearing over the tomb, healings, and visions. The vision of the true cross by St. Helena. So this is about his mother, not technically him. In some traditions, Constantine received a vision urging him to send his mother to the Holy Land to find the true cross of Christ. Helena, inspired by divine visions herself, discovered the cross near Golgotha. Constantine then built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre as the site of Christ's resurrection, enshrining Christianity's greatest relic. And then the last one, the myth of Constantine's Eastern crown. An interesting medieval legend, especially among Slavic Orthodox, claims that Constantine gave a crown and relics to Eastern Christian kings, especially those of Serbia, Bulgaria, and Russia, to symbolize their continuation of the Christian empire. This is part of the Third Rome theory. Old Rome fell, Constantinople, New Rome, and then after Constantinople's fall, Moscow is considered the Third Rome. So that's part of that understanding. It comes from a myth related to Constantine the Great. So guys, now we're going to get into some really great videos. Like I'm really excited to talk about the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, and I got a great Orthodox documentary on Constantine. So smash that like. Just want to take care of a few different things. Major shout out to Justin Henley, who just gifted a COTEL Crew membership. Thank you so much, Justin. Really appreciate that, my man. And he said, Christ is risen. Truly is risen. Thank you so much, Justin. God bless you, brother, and thanks for all the support. And our brother Jay Hamza throws in $30 over on Dono Chat and says, if I'm not mistaken, his baptism was part of what happened because of his son's death. Regardless, we should live every day as though it's our last. Time is short. Something is coming. Lord have mercy on us. Absolutely. Yeah, it was hard for me to pinpoint exactly the baptism in relationship to the timeline. So maybe there's, I'm sure there's documents and there's probably scholars that have that information. I found contradicting claims. I guess that's what I should say. Anyways, first thing, to keep a little housekeeping. If you'd like to support my work, one of the best things you can do is go over to my website and become a website member. You can do so with this link right here. We have 3 different types of memberships. Next week, we'll be having our premium members meeting, our think tank. And this coming Monday, we'll be having our fitness meeting for the month of May. So if you'd like to be interested, or if you are interested and like to be a part of those groups, those are private Zoom meetings. So it's just for members. You can sign up with the link that I just shared. I'd greatly appreciate that. And if anybody's interested in signing up for a one-on-one session, you can do so with this link right here, and we can hop into a private Zoom meeting, just you and me, and we can talk about any topic your heart desires. And again, a special thank you and shout out goes out to Leon today for sponsoring today's stream on St. Constantine. If you have a stream topic that you would like to be sponsored and for me to dive into and present here on YouTube, please sign up. Would greatly appreciate that. I'll email you after you purchase, and you can let me know what the topic is or the general angle that you're interested in, and then we'll come up with a game plan. So if that's something you'd be interested, please sign up. Would greatly appreciate that as well. Also, if anybody is in the market for some Orthodox items, check out orthodoxdepot.com. You get incense, prayer ropes, whatever it may be, t-shirts, hats. Use promo code COTEL, COTEL, C-O-T-E-L. You get 10% off. You help me out as well as a good Orthodox company. And then last thing, if anybody is interested, I know we're already past Lent, but if you're interested in our brother Seraphim's Orthodox Fasting Cookbook for Strength and Performance, you can purchase that with this link right here. And you can help me out, help our brother out. Let's see. And again, it is a great resource for if you are trying to fast and still go to the gym during the fasting periods. This is a great cookbook, and it has a foreword by Father Moses as well. So anyways, check that out if you guys are interested. Baklava 33, I love baklava, throws in 5, says, Brother Patrick, please pray for me. My name is Alexander. Just got into an accident less than 1 hour ago. God bless you, brother. I'm so sorry, baklava. God bless you, brother, and I will keep you in my prayers tonight. Hope you're doing well. Okay, so let's see. Let me pull up all my stuff I got for us today. So this is what I was talking about, the controversy surrounding Constantine's faith. And so this is according to Orthodox Wiki on Constantine the Great. If you go down here, it says the controversy surrounding Constantine's baptism. Can you guys see this? Yeah. Is based upon the legend arising from the discredited documents of the donation of Constantine, forged documents that date from about the mid-8th century. The story of the donation of Constantine was built on a legend that arose during the 4th century within Western Church, which thought it inappropriate that Constantine should be baptized on his deathbed by a bishop whose orthodoxy was in question, and thus was an act that was a snub to the authority of the Pope. The legend presents a story that earlier in Constantine's career, Bishop Sylvester I of Rome had baptized Constantine after curing him of leprosy. Eusebius of Caesarea recorded that the bishops, quote, performed the sacred ceremonies according to custom, unquote, of baptizing Constantine in May 337 by the bishop Eusebius of Nicomedia before Constantine's death on May 22nd, 337 at the age of 65. So there is, it's hard to know for certain. There's a lot of speculation regarding him, but in regards to his life, the best documentary that I found is this one right here. This is a video I found titled, The Saints, St. Constantine the Great by Linus Multimedia. I was not familiar with this, never heard of this group before, but this is a quality documentary. It seems like it's probably by about 10 to anywhere between 20 and 10 years old. It looks like it's a little bit older, but has great information. So we're going to begin with this today. And then I can't wait to get into the stuff regarding the battles. This video right here, we're going to watch all of this. When Christianity became dominant, the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. This is probably the best military overview of Constantine's military quest that I found. So looking forward to going over that. But here is our first video.
way to remember St. Constantine is a little bit tricky, bearing the same name. He's not somebody that I've always thought of.
Okay, let me take it off. I always speed everything up. Let me take this down. We'll go normal and we'll add captions. Everybody likes the captions.
In terms of a patron saint that I address prayers to as I feel closer, perhaps, to some other saints. I bear the name Constantine. He's my patron saint, but I have to be honest with you. This is not a saint to whom I would go in my private devotions and say, Saint Constantine, please pray for me, or please intercede for me in this particular way. I couldn't identify with the man. In earlier years, I was always hearing about the imperial things, and I let that kind of taint my impression of him. But as I look at it now from where I am, I feel more awe and more respect for him. I began to really do some soul searching and really read into his life. I feel more awe for him because I understand better the trappings of the world and how sometimes we try not to compromise, but we have to make some accommodations for things around us. We can't always have things the way that we want them. The church acknowledges genuine human struggle. Constantine was a real human being, and he struggled. If I were trying to look at him from the point of view of a 20th or 21st century Christian, I would have to be very critical. But if I understand things in the milieu that they come from, everything is a lot different, and I can understand that quite a bit better now than I could have earlier in my life. To understand the life of St. Constantine, we have to get a grasp on the times in which he was born. These were barbaric times. We're talking about Pax Romana, Roman peace, but how was Roman peace instilled? It was instilled with the sword. So we're talking about invasions, war, intrigue, that sort of thing. And these were cruel times, and this is the world into which Constantine was born.
Saint Constantine, the Great and equal to the apostles, was born in 271. His father, Flavius, was a military tribune. And like all soldiers, he went from one battlefield to the next. At one town that he came, his soldiers pitched their tents.
But always the leaders of the generals or the officers would rest and sleep at the inn.
And as was typical in those days, he not only sought lodging and food, but a young lady to keep him warm.
Now the innkeeper, seeing the man was of rank, decided that he was going to offer Flavius his young daughter, Helen, who at the time was 16.
And that night, Flavius sleeps with Helen.
Upon leaving the inn the next day, Flavius left behind one of his garments with his initials engraved in it, and some money for the innkeeper, that in case the young lady became pregnant or there was difficulties, she would be taken care of.
She did indeed become pregnant and would give birth to a child who would be named Constantine, who would indeed become Constantine the Great, or as we know him, Saint Constantine.
However, for the next several years, there is no father to be had. Flavius Constantine is gone, has not returned to check up on things, nor does he probably even know he has a son.
So Helen raised him on her own, basically.
A single mother, something that a lot of women in our situation here in America, our country, our time, now have to deal with also. Constantine, in essence, comes from a single parent family.
For 10 years, Helen, as a young teenager, and then as a young woman, raises the child, Constantine, by herself. Eventually, Flavius is elevated and becomes now not military tribune, but a military governor, and is sent to the area where Helen and her father and Constantine live.
The issue is, how does this daughter of an innkeeper now go to a military tribune of high rank and say, oh, by the way, I have your child, this is your son? It just didn't happen.
St. Helen, as many women would have liked to do, would have really gained much by going and informing this man that he had a son, but she didn't do that. It was her nature, it was her love for her child that only focused on the raising of this child and not on the power that he could have.
I mean, you got to think about the historical context too. So you're talking about a peasant girl who's pregnant, single mother at a very young age. I mean, according to them, she slept with Flavius at the age of 16, probably a virgin when it happened, becomes pregnant, and instead of making sure that Flavius finds out that she became pregnant, she just quietly raises Constantine without ever mentioning that publicly until the incidents you're about to hear when he began to be beaten by some Roman soldiers.
While the governor's in town, the soldiers have their horses by the inn. Young Constantine, 9 years old, is out playing with the horses.
The soldiers became angry and began to beat Constantine.
Helen hears the commotion, comes running out, attempts to stop them.
She cries out, "Stop, don't hit my son. He is the governor's child."
I'm sure the reaction was, "You and who else?"
She ran into the house and retrieved the robe that Flavius had given her with his initials on it when he was the military tribune of the area.
Helen does what any good, loving mom would do to protect her son. And she basically said, "Don't you know who his daddy is?" and they said, "No." So she told them. They didn't believe it. She comes out, here he is, shows the cape, and the smirks left the faces of the soldiers.
They were shocked and a little bit frightened, taken off base. They took the cloak and presented it to Constantius.
Flavius, at this point, could have easily rejected her and the child. He chooses not to, however. He does something interesting. He embraces them. He brings them in.
As she approached the mansion, of course, she probably was very uncomfortable because being a peasant girl, living a life of poverty, she is now going into luxury, which is a very strange life for her.
A man of his stature and class wasn't easy to marry, a woman of St. Helen's class, but he does so.
Again, she was not prideful and took the position of a secondary type of wife to the governor, even though he did marry her, in order to allow her son to have the great opportunity to be educated and to become something in his life.
And for about a 12 to 13 year period, this is how Constantine, Helen, and Flavius live.
And then after a while, it becomes evident that Flavius can't keep her around if he wants to go further in his career.
Keep in mind now that there were tremendous pressures to come up to the proper status as a Caesar.
Flavius receives a huge promotion. He becomes Caesar. But part of the deal was to marry the emperor's daughter.
So he told Helen, basically, "You're no longer useful to me. I need to move up in society."
He divorces Helen, and perhaps it was this incident also that sends her on her own spiritual quest, because it was about this time that she began to seriously consider the deeper meanings of Christianity within her own life.
And so, and this is the typical, this is the normative narrative. As I said, I found a few legends, a few stories, even in the Orthodox world, that claim maybe St. Helen was actually Christian before this incident. But most histories that I came across do say that after this divorce with Flavius, and apparently she took it very, very well, that she began seeking a deeper faith in Christianity. And this is at the same time that Constantine is now sent to the imperial court of Diocletian. Imagine that. Again, his mother, who he adorns, who basically has devoted her life to raising him and protecting him, is becoming Christian. And you then are working for the emperor, who is one of the largest persecutors and killers of Christians. The irony is incredible.
This woman, I mean, again, she's got to be the strongest woman, because she goes on a roller coaster ride her life. She has nothing. She has everything.
She's in, she's out again.
But we need to know that here in America these days, we didn't invent divorce, and we didn't invent the pain and the turmoil that come from divorce. What our church can show us, what Constantine will show us, is how people who are products of divorce don't have to roll over, play dead, give into their circumstances, and throw away their lives.
Flavius at this time could have cast Helen aside totally, and his son. He chose not to do that, however. He has them assigned to the Emperor Diocletian, being part of his imperial guard, close to his mother. And again, it was at this time that Helen begins her conversion. Obviously, this also has a deepening effect on Constantine.
When Constantine was with the imperial guard, his mind was working. He was observing. He was watching how things get done.
At this point, the emperors have to discredit the Christians, and more than just discredit, they have to eliminate them.
Nero is commonly referred to as the most ruthless emperor, but these emperors of this time are referred to as equal to Nero, if not more ruthless than Nero, and are really increasing and turning up the volume on the persecutions of Christians, and really killing many times even without inquiry.
Problem is, what do you do with them? How does one contend with a group of people who, when persecuted, repay with love, who, when tortured, proclaim forgiveness? How does it affect Constantine?
For Constantine to see what the Christians suffered, to see them tortured this way, and yet to see their fortitude, their faith, their loyalty to their God, must have made an impression upon him.
As history would have it sometimes, you know, the cliche that says history repeats itself. Constantine, he married a woman by the name of Minervina, who was not unlike the same type of person or the same status in life as his mother Helena. She was really a commoner.
And she becomes pregnant. During childbirth, she gives birth to a healthy baby boy, Crispus. But Minervina dies. which was not, sadly, uncommon during those days.
So Constantine has this child with Minervina. She dies. He goes off to battle. Helen comes in, the grandmother, to take care of the child and raise the child. It just goes to show you that there's nothing new under the sun. That this is the story that's played out in millions of homes now and through the ages, where the grandparents have to come in.
In July of 306, Constantine's father dies, and he is so well loved by his father's army that he's lifted up on their shields, and the imperial purple is clasped around Constantine's shoulders. So he is, in effect, the person who takes his father's place in the empire.
After becoming a Caesar, then going through the ranks a little bit more, Constantine marries the emperor's daughter, Fausta.
And as a wedding gift to Constantine, he's elevated now to emperor.
And so at the age of 34, 35, here we have now Constantine, emperor and married.
Over the next 4 years as an emperor,
And I was thinking about this. I am 35 years old, and I was thinking about my life in comparison to Constantine's life. You know, at this point, he had already experienced battle, highly educated, was married, wife died in childbirth. Now he's remarried, was working under the Emperor Diocletian. And at 34 to 35 years old is elevated to co-emperor of the Roman Empire. Like, that's incredible. And born to a peasant woman. If it wasn't for the status of his father Constantius, he would have had no status in society.
Constantine is victorious in numerous battles, many battles fought. And the hardest battle is yet to come, though, in Rome, when he will battle the Emperor Maxentius.
Constantine came into Rome, and at the great battle known in 312 at Milvian Bridge, there the battle took place that changed the course of history, but certainly the course of Christianity.
This is the battle. This is not talking about the whole empire. We're not talking about a small country. We're talking about an entire land, an entire kingdom.
In order to be sole ruler of the empire, Constantine has to face his brother-in-law Maxentius, and he does so. But Maxentius, before the battle, has consulted with an oracle, and the oracle tells him, your enemy, the enemy, will be defeated. And that, to be honest, drives Constantine's troops to despair, because most of them are not Christians.
Constantine's troops are dismayed. They feel like they're going to lose now.
Emperor Constantine is off on his own, privately wondering what on earth he can do to motivate these soldiers. What single thing can he do? Is there any way he can turn the tide? And as he's contemplating these things, Emperor Constantine looks up in the sky.
He sees blazing above the sun the cross and the words, "Enduto nika," in this conquer. With this, in other words, the cross of Christ, with faith in Christ, conquer. You will be victorious.
And so he immediately had the monogram of the cross put on the shields of his troops, of his soldiers, and he dedicated the battle in the name of Jesus Christ.
And so in a sense, it's almost a battle between Roman religion and Christianity, even though Constantine himself, to be honest, still doesn't know who Christ really is. So they gather for the battle. It goes badly for Maxentius. He loses. And Constantine enters the city as the sole Roman emperor.
And so now, before we finish the rest of this documentary, which we will, now I am excited to go over the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. And so we're going to watch just a little bit of this video. This is Kings and Generals, because it really does a better job of highlighting the historical context in which this battle is happening within. And then we're going to go over to this one, History Marche, and watch this full video, which covers the entire battle. And it does it in great detail. So then we'll come back to the documentary and finish the rest of Constantine's life. But here is a little bit of an introduction to the context in which the Battle of the Milvian Bridge occurs.
Previously, we have covered the events of the crisis of the 3rd century in the Roman Empire, with its plagues, civil wars, and economic problems, and constant incursions by Germanic tribes and the Sassanid Empire. As these difficulties progressed, Diocletian was proclaimed emperor by his soldiers in 284. A year later, he defeated his imperial rival, Carinus, at the Battle of the Margus River, claiming the empire for himself. His reign would prove to be a stabilizing force after the mayhem of the 3rd century. Sole rulership had proven unstable for the empire, so after his victory, Diocletian moved to Mediolanum and made his comrade Maximian Caesar of the West, forming the diarchy system. Maximian marched west to deal with rebellions in Gaul and Britannia, while Diocletian went east, winning a battle against the Sarmatians and making peace with the Sassanids. Then, in 286, he promoted his co-emperor to the rank of Augustus. Although they were now technically the same rank, Maximian was clearly the junior colleague in the relationship, and Diocletian would continue to make rulings affecting the entire empire. In 293, the diarchy evolved into the tetrarchy. To the east, Diocletian, ruling from Nicomedia, appointed another of his senior officers, Galerius, as his Caesar, who operated from Sirmium in the Balkans, while in the west, Maximian, governing from Mediolanum, appointed Constantius as his successor, whose capital was in modern Trier in Gaul. Diocletian instituted this rule of 4 in...
So you see, Constantius is in control of the western portion of the Roman Empire in the Tetrarchy.
an attempt to form a stable inheritance system, which seemed to possess some qualities which made the 2nd century so prosperous. The 2 senior partners, the 2 Augusts, would adopt their appointed Caesars as their sons and appoint them heir apparent. In addition, the Caesar would marry a daughter of their senior partner. The 4 co-emperors were a part of the so-called Imperial College. During November of 303, Diocletian traveled to Rome and celebrated the 20th anniversary of his rule with Maximian at his side. Also in his imperial retinue was a 31-year-old military tribune, Constantine. This young ward was the son of Western Caesar Constantius and had served as the right-hand man of Diocletian and Galerius since 293. It seemed evidently clear that he was being groomed for the Imperial College. Diocletian was struck by a vicious illness on his way back to Nicomedia, and
just want to tell everybody, remind everybody, smash that like. And if you would like to support my work and research, please send in a super chat on Streamlabs, Dono Chat, or on YouTube. And if you're feeling generous, please give some COTEL Crew memberships here on YouTube. We got more members-only videos on YouTube that are going to be uploaded this week.
Became unable to rule. In May of 305, the frail old emperor announced his abdication to the army, and Galerius succeeded him as the Eastern Augustus. Constantine stood on the tribunal with the imperial duo, expecting his promotion to Caesar. However, Galerius considered him too ambitious and ignored him in favor of a nephew, Maximinus, who could be used as a puppet. At the same time, an identical ceremony in Mediolanum saw Maximian step down and be replaced by Constantius, the father of Constantine. Galerius attempted to influence the events in the west, scheming to make Severus, who was loyal to him, the Western Caesar, instead of Maximian's son, Maxentius. Constantine and Maxentius would not stay idle, and would eventually cause the first fracture of the Tetrarchy. In this summer of 305, Constantius summoned his son from the east to join him in a campaign against the Picts. He was not satisfied with the succession settlement dictated by Galerius, and intended to introduce Constantine to his troops as his preferred heir. After a year of fighting with his father's troops, they declared him Augustus in modern-day York upon the death of Constantius during July of 306. When Galerius discovered news of this usurpation, he was angered and refused to acknowledge Constantine's succession as senior emperor. However, he would grant Constantine the title of Caesar, with which he was, for the moment, satisfied. To the south, in Rome, this succession also prompted Maxentius to act. When Galerius declared that taxes would now be levied on the city of Rome, the citizens, praetorians, and urban cohorts were furious. They declared Maxentius princeps, as he promised not to introduce taxes on the Eternal City. He was supported by the regions in the south of Italy, and importantly, Africa, which controlled the majority of Rome's grain supply. If Galerius was angered by Constantine's usurpation, he was furious at the same act perpetrated by Maxentius, whom he despised. Severus, who was a fellow puppet Augustus of Galerius, was ordered to destroy the usurper in Rome. In early 307, Severus left Mediolanum with a powerful field army and approached the city's massive walls. Intimidated by the colossal city, the army deserted when Maxentius offered lavish bribes to its commanders. Severus was captured and killed. Maxentius now controlled all of the Italian peninsula. In the summer of the same year, Galerius himself crossed the Alps and marched south with another army. Despite adding the defectors from Severus to his forces, Maxentius knew that Galerius was a capable commander, and wisely withdrew behind the walls. Realizing the difficulties of besieging such a massive city, Galerius took time to negotiate with Maxentius. This gave the princeps time to dispatch agents to the enemy siege camp to offer more bribes in exchange for defections. Surprisingly, this worked again, and Galerius was forced to retreat after losing a portion of his army. During their withdrawal, the Eastern Augustus allowed his defeated troops to plunder the country, which only angered the local population. With this victory, Maxentius declared himself Augustus. Galerius raised his lieutenant Licinius in place of the now dead Severus. But the Caesars, Constantine and Maximinus, the latter of which proved to be less of a puppet than expected, were not satisfied with this. Under pressure, Galerius modified the imperial college to consist of 4 Augusts in 310. In the same year, Maxentius had to quell a rebellion in Africa to secure his food supply. In April of 311, Galerius passed away from illness, and the stage was set for the decisive conflict. Constantine was rallying a huge army and made an alliance with Licinius, while Maximinus finally granted Maxentius the official recognition he was looking for.
So if you're following here, Constantine is a Caesar of the western portion. Licinius is the Caesar of this middle portion, the green portion. Galerius, who passes away, he was the essentially the head emperor, and then the co-emperor then reigns in Rome. Now we have basically 3 different powers vying for dominance over the Roman Empire, and this sets the stage for what will become the Battle of the Milvian Bridge.
Afraid of Licinius's growing power, in early spring 312, Constantine finally crossed the Alps and won 2 major battles in northern Italy.
And this is where we're going to switch over to the other one because of the incredible details of History Marche's video. So now we're going to follow in detail the battle, Constantine's battle over his brother-in-law at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. So let me make sure this is at 1.25. Get a little slow.
Spring 312 AD in the far northwest of the Italian peninsula. The Cottian Alps glow in the sunny dawn as the busy town of Segusio comes to life. The sentries on the walls have no way of knowing that they are about to witness the first step of a military campaign that will change the world. An army materializes out of the splendid morning light, coming from the mountain passes west of the town. At its head rides the impressive figure of Flavius Valerius Constantius, known to us as Constantine the Great. His arrival will alter history in a manner inconceivable to even the most prominent of astrologists and soothsayers. The sight of his army takes the local militia and the few regulars of the town's garrison by surprise. They are sworn to Emperor Maxentius, one of the 4 tetrarchs. It was thought that Constantine would spend the campaigning season subduing the tribes of the Rhine. Instead, he is here. The lines of Constantine's iron-faced veterans finally form up in front of Segusio. When the order to open the gates is refused, the onslaught begins. Darts and javelins pick off the men on the walls. Arrows and slingshot put pressure on the towers as the heavy infantry closes in on the walls. The militiamen are stunned by the ferociously quick advance. Ladders go up, and before long, Constantine's men push their way over the parapet. Howls of agony are heard as the legionaries cut their way into the town in a machine-like manner. While the town's defenders are still in the midst of reorganization, a specialist detachment has set the town's gates on fire. Segusio falls in short order, and Constantine's bid for Rome and supremacy has begun. Constantine's chilling descent from the Alps into Italy put Maxentius's already strained situation into a full crisis. Originally elevated by the Praetorian Guard and the people of Rome and wider Italy to halt the introduction of imperial taxes and the disbursement of the city's garrison to the war-torn provinces, Maxentius had promoted himself as the champion of the eternal city and its ancient people. Unlike previous emperors, such as the recently deceased Diocletian, who only stepped foot in the city in the 20th year of his reign, Maxentian would make the greatness of Rome the focus of his rule, and it won him great popularity. With the African provinces of Carthage also coming under his remit and providing grain, he was at first able to discharge large remittances and begin grand building projects in the city once more. When the legitimate rulers of the tetrarchy system he had upended advanced to bring him to heel, first Flavius Valerius Severus and then later Galerius Flavius Maximinus, Maxentius offered bribes and the promise of his new Italian-centric order skillfully manipulating their soldiers to desert to his side in droves. This policy, along with the sheer size of the city of Rome itself and the difficulty of investing it, made Maxentius's seizure of power a fait accompli. In the same year that Maxentius appointed himself as ruler of the Italian portions of the empire, Constantine broke with Diocletian's tetrarchic order and was acclaimed Augustus by his soldiers at Eboracum in Roman Britain. Making his way across the Channel and into Gaul, he established a base at Trier and then engaged the marauding Franks with success in the winter. Maxentius and Constantine were thus both sons of emperors, and both rebelled after they were passed over for promotion to the Tetrarchy. Maxentius on the retirement of his father Maximian, and Constantine after the death of his father Constantius while on campaign in Britain. This effectively collapsed the tetrarchic system, and over the course of the next half-decade, there was much fighting and jockeying for position. At one point, the empire had no fewer than 7 rulers, all of them claiming some kind of legitimacy from the original formation instituted by Diocletian. By 312, this had been reduced to 4, Constantine in the west, with Britain, Gaul, and Spain pledging loyalty to him. Maximian Daza in the east, controlling Anatolia, Syria, and Egypt. Licinius, who controlled the Pannonian, Illyrian, and Greek provinces up to the Bosphorus, and Maxentius in Italy and North Africa. But Maxentius was finding that the original premise of his elevation was wearing thin. Not only was Italy and Rome now cut off from the income provided by the provinces, but revolts in Africa also endangered the grain supply, meaning that Maxentius was forced to institute the very taxes and conscription that he had pledged to block at the outset of his coup. The policies worked, and Maxentius was able to retake Africa, securing the grain and also heavily plundering the rebel areas. This action sent a strong message to the other 3 Augusti. Maxentius had a large, capable army, possibly 100,000 strong, and his adroit command structure, logistical capacity, and strategic prowess had been made manifestly evident in the transcontinental operation. Though he had lost the support of his people, his army remained loyal, at least for the time being. Convinced that Constantine was intending to campaign once more against the Franks in 312, he had sent his general, Praetorian prefect, Ruricius Pompeianus, to the east approaches to block an expected attack from Licinius. Pompeianus was likely in Verona when Constantine arrived in Italy and invested Segusio, and there was another strong Maxentian force at Aquileia. Maxentius was in Rome, apparently due to a portent that the city would fall, and he would die were he to leave it. Nevertheless, his armies in the northeast swiftly set off to interrupt and engage the invading army of Constantine. With the small garrison and local militia of Segusio defeated and the city in his hands, Constantine went against expectations again and pardoned the population and their leaders. He ordered his army to put out...
This is one of the interesting things about Constantine. Again, he's showing a sort of Christian mercy to these various cities that he's conquering in his quest to become emperor of Rome, which have fed into some of the legends that maybe he already had a sort of soft disposition towards Christianity, or maybe his mother was already catechizing him at a younger age. But this is part of the reason for his success, is because he was so tolerant of some of the inhabitants of various cities that he would come across.
The fires that had started as a result of their burning the city gates, and the gratitude of the populace was such that the town immediately pledged itself to him. This was a notable action by Constantine, as the city had refused to surrender when he initially offered it terms. He was, however, focused on playing the role of liberator and ultimately becoming Augustus of a reunited empire, so his campaign was conducted with a significant amount of restraint. With Segusio thus secure, Constantine's army moved on to Augusta Taurinorum, modern Turin. There, he skillfully enveloped and dispatched another professional Maxentian army. Chasing them through the Po Valley, Constantine outfitted his troops with iron-covered clubs, which proved deadly against armored cavalry. After this...
Yeah, absolutely. He says Maxentius was just waiting for the inevitable there. He is. He's essentially just waiting for Constantine to make it to Rome and then gets totally obliterated at the battle. So anyways, let's continue on.
This action, Constantine occupied Mediolanum without a contest, and from there moved east to besiege Verona. Pompeianus attempted to wear down and stall Constantine's army with another cavalry attack, but this was also broken.
Remember, guys, without this battle, without these conquests by St. Constantine, like the history of Christianity is totally different. And I can't help but, again, while you watch this, look at the providence of everything, especially throughout the rest of the stream and the videos we watched, of Constantine being the Christian emperor and him having the desire to re-Christianize Rome, the Roman Empire. It does feel very providential.
At Brixia, Constantine fighting in his usual place at the front line, and likely using the same envelopment tactics he had at Augusta Taurinorum. Working on videos is a dream job that can affect to his doors. Most come to support remarch. By the late spring or early summer, Constantine was at the walls of Verona, the base of Maxentius's forces in northern Italy. Pompeianus was inside the city, and for the first time in the campaign, Constantine was facing a commander of elite ability. Both men attempted to force the matter to a head. First, Constantine cut off the city's supplies by investing it from the south and taking the opposite bank of the river Athasis, which surrounded the settlement on the remaining 3 sides. He was unable to force his way through the formidable defenses of Verona, however, and Pompeianus felt assured enough to lead an assault at his main lines. This failed, and Pompeianus next escaped through Constantine's blockade and made his way to Aquileia for reinforcements. Constantine was still incapable of overpowering the veterans inside Verona, and when Pompeianus returned, leading another strong army, Constantine found himself in a similar position to Julius Caesar at Alesia. With no time or means to construct a second line of defense works, as the dictator had in his battle with Vercingetorix, Constantine channeled the spirit of his forebear and led a portion of his force in a final battle, inspiring his men in the front line. Pompeianus likewise seemed to have fought from the front, leading his men in laying about the besieging force, but it was Constantine's day. Pompeianus had come onto Constantine's forces while the sun was setting, and the fighting lasted until well into the dark. The Maxentian forces only gave way when Pompeianus himself was killed in the thick of the lines. Constantine sent a new call for surrender to the garrison inside the city, which they accepted after losing their talismanic leader. Aquileia then seems to have gone over to Constantine's side in the wake of the carnage at Verona, and with his numbers likely raised again by defectors from the remainder of Maxentius's northern forces, Constantine set off on the Via Flaminia for Rome. From Ariminum on the east coast, he proceeded to Fanum Fortunae, before making the abrupt turn across the Apennines and threading the Furlow Pass, and moving on to the Schedria. There does not seem to have been any serious attempt by Maxentius to halt Constantine at these choke points, but it is possible that the forces stationed at Spaletium and Ocriculum gave the advancing army a hard fight to pass through their elevated environs. Both towns feature long slopes that would have made any advancing army an open target while it was proceeding upward, and the exchange of missiles before the inevitable crunch of the infantry battle would have been a searing, torturous crucible. Constantine's army continued toward Rome, but Maxentius's Moorish North African cavalry and lanciarii, specialist mounted personnel with the javelin, harassed his columns and flanks. 9 miles from Rome, at Saxa Rubra, the personal forces of Maxentius and Constantine had their first major altercation, when Maxentian units likely used the volcanic rock ridges and bluffs of the area to initiate an ambush on Constantine's vanguard. Little detail is known about this action, except that Maxentius's forces seem to have had significant success, likely lacerating Constantine's vanguard and either forcing their retreat to the main body of the army, or else compelling the main body to come forward and suffer losses in extricating their comrades from the Maxentian attacks. Constantine's host remained mostly intact following the battle, but Maxentius had scored a significant blow. Both sides now regrouped, and the leaders deliberated their next actions. Maxentius had gained his first victory since Constantine arrived in Italy more than 6 months earlier, but the city and its hundreds of thousands of people were still highly restive, and the magnetism and persuasive character that had seen Maxentius through all of the tribulation of the previous 6 years perhaps seemed a spent force. At games held to celebrate the 6th anniversary of his accession, the people cried out to Maxentius that Constantine could not be defeated and that he had to face him. The threat of losing the support of the mob was very real, and there had already been instances of fighting between his praetorians and the citizens. But Maxentius's forces in Rome still remained loyal, and their confidence had undoubtedly been boosted by the events at Saxa Rubra. In a grand gesture, perhaps to instill further belief in his ranks, he publicly consulted the ancient Sibylline books, the prophetic volumes sold to the last king of Rome more than 8 centuries earlier. Maxentius...
I love this portion of the battle. So what you're getting ready to hear is Maxentius is appealing to these prophetic pagan books that whoever he's getting ready to come across in battle is going to be defeated, because according to these pagan prophecies, the true defender of Rome is going to triumph. Now, you could obviously read these, hindsight 2020, that Constantine is the true emperor of Rome. But within the same, day or two, Maxentius is appealing to these pagan prophecies to galvanize the support amongst his soldiers and the populace of Rome. And at the same time, Constantine is praying for a sign to galvanize his soldiers because of this sort of brief defeat, the first defeat that Constantine's soldiers face in Italy. Again, a small skirmish, really. Because of that, some of them are a little bit down and out. And Constantine prays for a sign. And this is when he sees the cross in the sky above the sun. In this sign, conquer. And he then claims that he's had this vision, and apparently galvanizes much of the soldiers, and they get re-inspired that the God of Christianity, which, remember, is being persecuted by the Roman Empire. This is, although growing and spreading, isn't exactly a prestigious thing to label oneself. That the Christian God is going to assure Constantine and his soldiers victory in this upcoming battle.
Announced that the prophecies told him that an enemy of Rome would perish in battle. And he also chose the very day of his accession, the 28th of October, as the date on which he would eradicate Constantine. As the self-appointed champion of the city, Maxentius said it stood to reason that Constantine was the enemy the Sibyl was referring to in the books. These were auspicious tidings, but it was most likely that Maxentius felt that the city would not stand against a prolonged siege, and assassination was too realistic a possibility to remain inside it. Although contemporary sources state that the city was provisioned for an unlimited time, it's almost certain that the African revolt had affected his reserves, and Constantine's forces were unlikely to defect, as Severus's and Galerius's legions had when they made their respective attempts to take Rome. Constantine was every bit as circumspect as Maxentius in keeping his army satisfied with their conditions. Throughout his reign, he had endeavored to either keep them on campaign where they would avail of plunder and awards, or made sure that they were paid all salaries and attendant service bonuses. But after the shock of defeat at Saxa Rubra, Constantine needed some further motivation for his legions to overcome their last and greatest hurdle, and it came in the form of divine inspiration. Encamped north of Rome, his biographers Lactantius and Eusebius relate that Constantine underwent a transformative experience in which he, and possibly his men, saw a phenomenon in the sky that formed a solar symbol similar to a Christian cross. Constantine's dreams later that night elaborated on this vision, and when he awoke the next morning, he gave orders for his men to emblazon their shields with the Chi-Rho symbol of Christ. Whether it was a genuine spiritual event for Constantine or an obvious evolution of his existing monotheism with the sun god, the spectacular blessings of heaven on the campaign reinvigorated his ranks and filled him with spirit for the looming collision. Thus it was, with Constantine galvanized by the vision of the Christian God and Maxentius by the ancient prophecies of the Sibyl, the two armies met on a bend in the Tiber, just north of the Milvian Bridge. Maxentius sent his army along the Via Flaminia toward the Tiber River, its water swollen by autumn rains. Some units crossed the Tiber via the Milvian Bridge, and others employed an improvised pontoon bridge of boats just upstream. Awaiting Constantine, they set up camp on the northern and southern banks of the river, and the North Bank units took control of the southern edge of the plain, now known as the Tor de Quinto. Maxentius had chosen this plain as the site for the coming battle. With their left flank covered by steep bluffs and their rear and right by the meander of the Tiber, there would be no room for either side to conduct complex tactics. This was to nullify the tactical genius of the formidable Constantine, known for his adeptness in envelopment tactics. Constantine's army approached the northern edge of the plain, harassed on its march by Moorish cavalry and mounted lancieri. Constantine's army was a crack force of veterans, consisting of legionary detachments from the Rhine and Britain, as well as guardsmen and cavalry. They had fought multiple campaigns in Britain and the Rhineland under Constantine and his father before him, and their victories in northern Italy had added further to their experience and morale. Constantine had also levied units from defeated barbarian tribes, including Germans and possibly Picts. A panegyric to Constantine notes that his army had fewer than 40,000 men when it first arrived in Italy, from a total of perhaps 160,000 under Constantine's command in Britain, Gaul, Germania, and Iberia. He was limited in this way, as he could only bring so many soldiers without compromising the Rhine and British frontiers. Furthermore, his army had undergone attrition through casualties and the possible need to garrison cities, so it is likely that he had between 30 and 35,000 men by the time he descended onto the Tor de Quinto. Its grasses, oleander and laurel trees, a more vibrant green than usual in the autumn, mixed with the caramel brown of the soil. The Maxentian army included the Praetorian Guard and the Imperial Horse Guard. These units were traditionally based in Rome and had been by Maxentius's side from the beginning. Also present were the thousands of veterans of Severus and Galerius who had defected to Maxentius during their attempts to unseat him, including various legionary units and the elite Moorish cavalry of Severus. In addition, Maxentius had recruited large numbers of Italians, Sicilians, and North Africans as legionaries. Many of the latter units appear to have been untried and undertrained levies. However, the veterans of Severus and Galerius had served in campaigns during the Tetrarchy of Diocletian, and under Maxentius they had seen further action against the African usurpation and Licinius. Saxa Rubra had given a glimmer of hope that Constantine's forces were indeed beatable, but any Maxentian officer who knew their history would have been aware that border legions, used to aggressive offensive action against lethal and numerous enemies, almost invariably bested Italian-based units and the Praetorians, whose duties were almost entirely limited to garrison and public order duties. From its 100,000-strong size at the advent of the campaign, it is likely that Maxentius's army was similar in numbers to that of Constantine prior to the Milvian Bridge. He may have had a modest numerical advantage, enough to justify fighting a battle using less experienced conscripts, but he probably had between 35 and 40,000 troops under his command. Maxentius's army allowed Constantine's men to array themselves in the plain, and both sides prepared for an existential clash. The composition of both armies were also indicative of the changes within the Roman army that had begun under Diocletian and would continue until the collapse of the Western administration in the next century. Most noticeably, cavalry had a far more prominent role and comprised a greater proportion of the total units than in that of the classical legions, with the ally auxiliary units that had long dominated mounted support being sent entirely to the border, and vexallations, regular cavalry that were equal in rank to the legionaries, replacing them. Constantine himself commanded the Clibanarii, super-heavy cavalry that were the embryonic form of the medieval cataphract, and used to tear gaping holes in enemy lines and allow the infantry to take advantage in their wake. Other noticeable differences would have been the mixture of different legionary standards across both sides of the battlefield. In contrast to earlier centuries, most of the new legions formed under Diocletian were smaller than the classical legion, but those that were still in the order of 5,000 to 6,000 men did not campaign with their full complement of legionaries. Instead, perhaps only a third of their members went on campaign, while the remainder attended to garrison duties or operations in another area. At the same time, the non-Roman elements that would, in the coming decades, begin to dominate the legionary ranks were also already becoming significant in Constantine's army. The Alemannic king Procas had been prominent when Constantine was proclaimed Augustus at Eboracum, and he and his warriors were likely also present at the Milvian Bridge, in addition to other Germans and the Picts. As the two forces faced one another, each seeing the personal standards of their respective emperors for the first time, the meander of the Tiber around both armies ensured that if either side routed, the options for retreat would be limited. Maxentius and the units on the south bank crossed the bridges to join the rest of the army and then destroyed the pontoon bridge. The boats forming the bridge would have foundered and knocked into one another, floating until they came to an uneven stop at another point in the churning river. Only the Milvian bridge was left standing. Maxentius cut the bridge of boats to encourage a fight-or-die mentality among his soldiers. With limited space available, Constantine likely formed his infantry into a double-line formation, a duplex arches. With even less space to maneuver, Maxentius's infantry appear to have formed an agmen quadratum, a deep rectangular defensive formation that would help them to cope with the attacks of Constantine's veterans. The Italian and African levies likely took up position as reserves in the formation's rear, whereas the Praetorians and legionary veterans formed the front line. The formation was protected on its left by steep hills, and on its right by Maxentius himself, who took up position with part of his cavalry. These horsemen consisted of at least 2 divisions, with Maxentius and the Imperial Horse Guard forming part of a second or reserve division behind the vanguard. To their front were Constantine's best cavalry, led by Constantine himself. Both armies likely also had cavalry on their other flank.
It's another thing to appreciate about St. Constantine is that he always rode in the front line in battle. And as we're going to see here in the Milvian Bridge, it's him who leads his men to the first clash in this famous, important, world-changing battle. All right. As I said, I believe personally, as an Orthodox Christian, this is the most important battle in history because it is the formation of Christian Rome. But Constantine was a battle-tested warrior. And as somebody said in the comment earlier, he was a strong man, absolutely, and brave and honorable, and literally would ride in battle to the front, where Maxentius goes behind he's at the back line of his cavalry. Constantine is at the front line of his.
And skirmishers to their front. As the 2 armies approached one another, Constantine initiated hostilities, leading his cavalry against the Maxentian right-wing horsemen. Meanwhile, Constantine's generals ordered the infantry to advance against the agmen quadratum. The experienced Constantinian mounted units propelled into the enemy with such ferocity that they quickly overwhelmed the Maxentian mounted vanguard and caused them to rout. Lacking space, the fleeing cavalry charged through their own men, causing disarray among the infantry and the 2nd Division of Cavalry. Not long after, the infantry lines clashed, and a fearsome battle ensued along the front lines. This was the point where the battle would be won or lost. Neither side could afford to retreat, despite the heat of exertion and armor, the injuries, and the agonizing attacks from the men across from them. In the confined space of the battlefield, veterans on both sides hacked at one another with spear and sword, and hurled their pila to wound or kill. The rear ranks threw lance, a kind of light javelin, and a plumbatai, lead-weighted darts, as well as shooting arrows. These plumbatai were tipped with razor barbs on top of a short, hand-length metal shaft, under which was placed a lead weight. At just under half a pound, they could be flung towards the enemy, either embedding themselves into a shield and weighing it down, or else puncturing flesh and embedding to a depth of about 3 inches, scraping and splintering bone. Maxentius's Praetorians fought with special vigor. They were among Maxentius's closest supporters and beneficiaries. They also did not expect to receive mercy from Constantine, being greatly responsible for the usurpation of domains that had been in the possession of his father, Constantius. With the contest still in question and Maxentius's force holding for the moment, Constantine's cavalry division halted to regroup and recuperate, but Maxentius and his 2nd Division of horsemen soon emerged before the Constantinians and bore down upon them. Maxentius hoped to use fresh troops against an exhausted enemy, but the Constantinians were not so easily overcome. They were a disciplined unit and had defeated the vanguard too quickly to fully exhaust themselves. Moreover, the flight of the vanguard through the ranks of their own comrades had caused a delay while Maxentius formed the counterattack. The horse guard charged, their iron hooves thrumming so loudly over the soft earth that they eclipsed the noise of the still ferocious infantry battle. The moment of contact was colossal, the energy of the lances striking armor reverberating across the plain like a shockwave. For an instant, everything hung in the balance. More and more men of both armies lost sight for all else, except for their own survival, and and the slaughter of their enemy. But Constantine's cavalry held firm, and a bitter fight took place beside the fast-flowing waters of the Tiber. So long as Maxentius's 2nd Division also held its line, there was stalemate, a grinding attrition that wore away at the ranks like flaking paint. As with the Praetorians, the Imperial Horse Guard had been loyal to Maxentius from the beginning. However, led by their divinely inspired emperor, Constantine's cavalry would not be denied the victory that had been promised. And slowly but surely, they gained the upper hand. Finally, perhaps with the fall of a single cavalryman or the turn of a horse, Maxentius's 2nd Division routed, and Maxentius fled with them. His army quickly unraveled. Seeing their right flank exposed, Maxentius's raw levies also fled from the fight, abandoning the veterans to their front. Some of Constantine's cavalry remained on the heels of Maxentius, while others attacked his frontline infantry in the flanks and rear. Blood was in the water, and they could sense the release of victory. Maxentius's veteran infantry was now fighting a losing battle, but the Praetorians in particular refused to flee. As their green legionaries broke and fled, the Praetorians found themselves surrounded on all sides. Behind, the fugitives fled for the Milvian Bridge. It became a bottleneck, and many escaping soldiers tried to wade or swim across. Scores, hundreds, and finally thousands drowned in the churning waters. Other soldiers attempted to crowd onto the narrow Milvian Bridge, pushing one another into the Tiber as they attempted to make it to the other side. With Constantine finally catching up to them, those caught on the north bank of the Tiber were summarily massacred. As for Maxentius, he attempted to ford the Tiber on horseback before being overcome by its strong current and swollen waters. Covered in heavy armor, the Tetrarch drowned in the Tiber's waters, along with many of the other fugitives. Meanwhile, the Praetorians fought on, falling where they stood, until finally Constantine offered them the opportunity to surrender. Perhaps surprised and relieved, the Praetorians accepted the offer. Losses for either army are not well documented, but it is certain that Maxentius's army suffered very high casualties. Constantine had won Rome, the greatest city in the world and the lawful and spiritual home of the empire, until he decided to construct his new capital at Byzantium in the coming decades. By the next day, the Tiber's current had slowed, the river being clogged with corpses. Maxentius's body was held in place by obstructions, perhaps others who had drowned. Recognizable by its distinctive armor, his corpse was fished out of the river and beheaded. Constantine entered the city in triumph, the Cairo of Christ prominently displayed for the first time by any emperor. Next to the cross, Maxentius's head was paraded through the streets on a spear.
Can you imagine that? So Constantine just wins this, world-changing battle. And what they do is parade through the streets is the Cairo of the first two letters of Christ in Greek and the head of Maxentius. Oh boy, were times different. Can you imagine that now?
Constantine once more presented himself as a liberator, and so the city's inhabitants played their part, hurling abuse at Maxentius to please their new imperator. Maxentius's old collaborators, the Senate, declared Constantine Maximus Augustus, and Constantine rededicated Maxentius's construction projects in his own name. In a final move that showed just how thorough his triumph was, Constantine disbanded the imperial horse guards and the Praetorians, redistributing them along the Rhine and Danube frontiers. Destroying their fortified camps and desolating their cemeteries, the emperor built churches in their place. In dissolving the Praetorian Guard, the emperor ended a military unit that had existed since the time of Augustus. Constantine's victory gave him control over the entire Western Empire, and soon afterward, in 313, Constantine's ally Licinius
And so before we get to the very end of this video, I just want to remind you, so the Battle of the Milvian Bridge is 312. 313 is the Edict of Milan, the legalization of Christianity. And so I just want to list a few things that I wrote down in regards to the importance of the Battle at the Milvian Bridge. So obviously the importance regarding the consolidation of power in the Western Roman Empire. So that's kind of what they're highlighting right now. But the theological and spiritual turning point of the history really of all of Europe, the Roman Empire, that it is this point in which Christianity is essentially, from, again, the Edict of Thessaloniki makes it official, but that Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. It's the end of the age of martyrdom. It's the end of the persecutions of Christians. It's the end of, St. Ignatius in the Colosseum fighting lions. It's the end of this period. And in fact, what we're going to see is that Constantine goes in the year 324 and defeats Licinius in battle because he begins persecuting Christians again. And Constantine views himself as being divinely led by what he continues to refer to as the Christian God, Jesus Christ. He believes is personally leading him in his imperial rule. So the ending of the age of martyrdom, as I said, the birth of the Christian civilization, Constantinople eventually, after what we'll see here in just a couple minutes, the rededication of the new Rome. And he believes, again, according to a dream he had, an angel told him to build Constantinople as the new Jerusalem. And this is one of the reasons why no expense was spared for Constantinople. It truly was the capital of the world, the crowning jewel of civilization. And it was intended to be that way, based on it sort of defining the turning point of Roman history as Christian. The geopolitical and cultural legacy. So this victory indirectly led to the entire Christianization of Europe. So without this battle, without what happens afterwards, there is no Christian Europe. Although, again, they've fallen away from it. This is the problem of modernity, generally speaking. But he then founds, again, Constantinople, and Byzantium is the longest ruling single dynasty or empire, not dynasty, but empire in the world, in world history. Imagine that. The longest reigning empire in world history is the Eastern Orthodox Christian Empire of Byzantium, of the Byzantine Empire. So again, a lot of political, religious, theological, civilizational, geopolitical, spiritual, all of these things were totally reoriented due to Constantine's defeat of Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge.
Through Maximinus Daza in turn, the two men splitting the empire between them for a decade. Constantine would eventually overthrow Licinius, uniting the empire under his sole rule in 324. Most importantly, Constantine's success at the Milvian Bridge confirmed to him that the God of the Christians had guided his victory. From that moment, Constantine would dedicate himself to actively promoting Christianity, a religion that was still being persecuted in many parts of the empire at the time of the battle. Sponsored by the imperial state apparatus, Christianity took hold with far-reaching consequences for the history of the Mediterranean and eventually the entire world. If you stayed around this far...
So very, very important stuff. And I'll just fast forward here to the end of this because it gives a little bit of a different flavor.
And claimed the entirety of the West for himself. At the same time, his ally Licinius would defeat Maximinus to claim the East in 313. However, the alliance between the two was not to last. After Licinius began to persecute Christians in his new realm, Constantine attacked and defeated him at the Battle of Chrysopolis in 324, reuniting the empire in his name. From this point, the Roman Empire would increasingly become a Christian realm, disregarding the pagan gods of its past.
And so now we're going to go back to the documentary of Constantine and listen to more about his life after the battle at the Milvian Bridge.
Saint Constantine really sees something in the sky, and that something, was it the cross of Christ? Was it the words as well? With this, conquer?
I tend to believe it. And the reason why is because if Christianity was a mainstream, accepted religion in those days, wouldn't be a problem. But it wasn't. Christians were being persecuted. Christianity was seen as an anti-emperor religious cult, which was opposed to the empire. And for him all of a sudden to take this symbol and then say, put this on your shields, we're going to win because of this, just flies in the face of all rational thought at that time.
For Constantine to order that his soldiers' shields bear the cross of Christ, that the cross of Christianity, of a God who was tortured and humiliated and was crucified, for him to order for that symbol of Christianity, which at that time was a symbol of disgrace. And there's no way that a disingenuous person would command that his troops, who were not of that faith, bear this humiliating sign of the cross, unless he firmly believed it. And Constantine believed that.
After Constantine became emperor, one of the first things that he did was to issue the Edict of Milan. The Edict of Milan officially ended the persecution of Christians. It made it legal for Christianity to exist.
It's he who calls the First Ecumenical Council to settle the Arian controversy.
We know that at the First Ecumenical Council, there was a lot of strong passions and feelings that came out about the person of Arius and about his teachings. And in response to what Arius was teaching, in order to correct it, the first part of the creed was written. And particularly when we say, and I believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, begotten of the Father before all ages, that this is exactly a response to what Arius had been saying, that there was a time when he was not. The church is saying, no, he was begotten, he existed before all ages. So the creed in those words is specifically directed at the wrong teachings of Arius. So with all of this was resolved, the pronouncement was made to condemn the teachings of Arius and to preserve the orthodoxy of the true church.
And although Constantine, Emperor Constantine, was bringing peace and harmony to the Christian church, it's not as if his empire was made up of predominantly Christians. It's not as if he himself had been baptized, had been motivated, saw himself as being born in Christ, being a Christian himself.
His first coins, in fact, are still minted with the inscription Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun. S-U-N, not S-O-N, not yet. He's not quite to that point yet.
I think the reason why Constantine did not become a Christian after the battle, even after the vision, is the same reason that many people to this day won't fully commit their lives to Christ. Even people in the church, let alone outside the church. And that's because they don't know what'll happen. With Constantine as a Caesar, he could plan his life. It was predictable. He had control over it. He had a lot of say in what would happen in his life and what it would look like. But if he gave his life to Christ, all bets are off. He wouldn't know what would happen. And same thing today with so many people. They don't give their life to Christ because they want to be in command. They want to be able to call the shots. And if they give their life to Christ, they don't know what will happen or what direction they'll go. And they're right.
Much like he didn't want to anger the gods at one point, at this point, he doesn't want to anger the God who helped him win the battle, the God who gave him the sign.
And yet it was not so much that he respected or wanted to embrace Christianity at the time, as it was a fear of losing power. Therefore, Constantine acted and carried out his duties just like his predecessors. And unfortunately, even though he was the freer of the Christians, and even though he was calling the First Ecumenical Council to help Christianity get their act together, he was still killing emperors and their families as they popped up, trying to take some of his power away. It was a dual nature, and yet it was understandable because Constantine was just a product of his society.
Constantine presents truly a human enigma, and to me personally, I mean, here's a man who would conquer, and not just simply conquer and come into his territory as king, as emperor, but someone who would not only discredit his former enemy, the emperor, but have him killed, and have his entire family killed. And then, at the same time, do what he could to raise the ethical premium of that territory. For example, the lives of slaves became better. He took into account the needs of impoverished children. What do you make of a man like that?
Around this time, Crispus now has been his lieutenant, his Caesar, for 10 years.
Crispus, not Christmas. The closed caption was wrong there. So Chrysippus, his first son by Mervina, his first wife who died during childbirth. That's who he's referring to. And so he was Constantine's right man. And this is going to be the story about him, Constantine, killing his second wife, actually torturing her.
Years. So St. Constantine decided to have a celebration in Rome for the occasion of the 10th anniversary of Crispus's reign.
The whole family's on the way to Rome. They're together. One of the few times they're probably all together as a family. And as is the unfortunate case with many dysfunctional families, problems arise. And this one was a big one.
St. Constantine's wife, Fausta, had 2 sons by Constantine. And upon arriving in Rome and seeing the power of Crispus, she knew that one day Crispus would indeed ascend the throne.
Fausta, the wife of Constantine, accuses Crispus, 31 years old, Fausta is 35 years old, of trying to seduce her. Fausta makes this known to Constantine, and Constantine throws his son, Crispus, into jail.
Before St. Constantine is able to have Crispus interrogated, Fausta, with some co-conspirators, has the imperial execution papers forged, sealed, and Crispus is executed.
Constantine was not a stupid individual. Constantine read what was happening, had his wife executed in a very, very brutal way.
She is placed in a bathtub of scalding water. So not only does he have her killed, but basically tortured. It's a horrible death.
So here's a man again,
Imagine that, though, right? So as basically from everything that we've covered so far in the stream, Constantine's first son, his first wife who dies, is his right-hand man, probably one of his best friends. I mean, probably the closest person to him. He has remarried the daughter of one of the former emperors of Rome, Fausta. She lies to him. And remember what we talked about earlier, how St. Helen, his mother, how she helped raise Chrysippus because the mother died and Constantine was working in the imperial court of Diocletian. He couldn't be there all the time. In multiple instances, he went and fought battles for Diocletian. And so Helen, St. Helen, she had to raise Chrysippus. So this son, he's coming back to Rome to celebrate him because he is going to ascend the throne after Constantine. And his new wife, Fausta, lies to Constantine that Chrysippus is hitting on her and trying to get with her. Constantine arrests him. And before he had the chance to actually talk to his son to find out what happened in his side of the story, Fausta organizes his execution. And then he, as it showed, tortures Fausta by putting her in boiling hot water in a bathtub until she's dead. And so imagine, again, Constantine, like his life, what a crazy situation to be in. And I think after this event, he dives deeper into his faith as a Christian, at least according to all the legends and the stories that I was able to come across for today's stream. So very important point, crazy story for sure, but important point in Constantine's life.
Surrounding himself with events of intrigue that lead to bloodshed and death.
Was this terrible? Absolutely. But not any more terrible than the rest of the emperors. But God still used him because Christianity is in the business, and God is in the business of reclaiming people that are lost, of turning around hopeless situations.
In my heart of hearts, I think by this time, Constantine was a tortured man. On the one hand, he was coming to terms with some of the insights that he was given by his mother, by the witness of the Christians themselves, and yet he felt compelled by this urge for power, and yet he couldn't come to terms with both.
And at that point, he moved the empire. This was not a Band-Aid fix. This was a major fix.
Constantine at this point would move the capital from Rome to the city of Visas and later rename it after himself, Constantinople. St. Helen would do the opposite. She would go to Jerusalem and at this point begin her search for the holy relics.
And during this period of time, with, of course, St. Constantine's help, St. Helen visits many, many of these holy sites and places, finds many relics, and builds churches. But perhaps one of her greatest finds, if you will, is the cross of our Lord and God and Savior, Jesus Christ.
From that point on, the next 11 years of his reign became a reign of peace, a reign of prosperity, of economic growth, of power within the world through trade, through commerce, and most important, through religion, through spirituality.
At this point in his life, Constantine begins to have a series of mild heart attacks.
As he saw the end of his life, he approached a priest and asked to be baptized.
He wants to go, at that point, to be baptized in the Jordan River. He doesn't make it. He gets as far as Helenopolis, oddly enough, the city that he named after his mother.
And he's baptized, and he takes off the purple robes of royalty, and he puts on the white robe of a neophyte, of someone who's newly baptized.
They say that from the time that he was baptized, he never took off never wore anything other than his baptismal garment. He did not wear the imperial clothing anymore. He was absorbed in being Christian and being a follower of Christ. And that was more important to him than anything else. I think that his conversion and his baptism were most sincere.
And if he recovered from his illness, it is written that he stated he would no longer wear the imperial purple.
And it's as a neophyte, as someone newly baptized, as someone who is Fortis Manos, newly enlightened, newly illumined. That's how Constantine dies. That's how he goes to meet his maker.
He was baptized and accepted Christ, and Christ accepted him and forgave him and renewed him and made him a saint. And that's the story of Constantine. It was that small moment that brought glory, as opposed to many years that may not have been so glorious. But it was that moment. It was the thief on the cross who stole paradise. Because Jesus looked at the thief who committed many sins, much like Constantine, and said, from this moment, because the thief acknowledged him as Lord, from this moment you shall be with me in paradise. Perhaps Jesus looked down at Constantine and saw that life. And as he entered the baptismal waters of that font in his own empire at the hands of his own priests, and when he accepted Christ, maybe it was Christ who said, "At this hour, Constantine, you shall be with me in heaven." And he is in heaven, and he is a saint, and that's why we remember him today.
How do we define a saint? Is a saint someone who's a holy person all their life? If that's how we define a saint, then really there are very, very few saints. If a saint is somebody who was going a certain way and then changed their life and was touched by Christ and did great things with the position that they had because of Christ, if that's a saint, then he should be a saint.
We fall and we rise, we fall and we rise. Constantine was no different. There was no exception to that.
Once again, in church history, it is the peasant, it is the meaningless individual in society that is the gateway and the vehicle of greatness and of change and of salvation.
They call this the scandal of selection, that somehow God picks individuals by his time, by his plan, that we can't always know why he chose the particular persons he did and when he chose them to function. I think that this was just after 300 years, that the time was right, that Christianity had stewed under persecution for so long, and when it was going to be time for it to come out, it was going to erupt and blossom something beautiful.
A thought comes to mind with, Jesus Christos in Jesus Christ Conquer. I reflect on Constantine, and I think, obviously that was a sign he saw in the sky that he put on the shields that brought him the glory of his empire. But I think of it as for himself personally, because he was a man who all his life struggled for power, struggled for supreme power, and did many things that were horrific. And yet, at his deathbed, he says, "I've always thirsted for this, to be baptized. I would give my empire away. I would be a repentant peasant if I could grasp this." And I think that in Jesus Christ Conquer, I think it was for him to conquer himself, conquer his own struggles, conquer his own demons, to finally find Christ. And so maybe that's a different way of looking at it, that he needed to conquer his own destiny and to see for himself who truly Christ was, the King of Glory.
So May 21st, the feast day of St. Constantine and Helen. Keep that in your agenda book. So we covered much of, again, we basically covered his whole life. We went over the document. I wanted to just make a point. Remember, Edict of Milan is 313. Edict of Thessalonica, the official edict that says the Roman Empire is now Christian, is 380 by Theodosius I. So very, very important point. And then this video, I thought it was good, and I wanted to highlight here because it talks a little bit about the importance of the Edict of Milan. So we're going to check a little bit out on this. I saw some super chats came in. Oh, shout out to Kristen, Slowboy Whiteboard, member for 25 months. Thank you so much, Christian. She says, "I've been making dinner. Thanks, Patrick, for the great auditory entertainment." Well, thank you very much for being here and everything you do in the chat. Thank you so much, Kristen. God bless you and the family. Jason McInity throws in 5. McInty. Love the History Marche video. I can spurg out for hours about battlefield topics. Yeah, me too. I can watch so many things on the various tactics. One of the things that I thought was interesting is that one of the things that Constantine was great at was luring the enemy into a basically not a trap or something of a trap, but a military tactic of engulfing and getting people to get into the position so that you can better manipulate and attack their flanks and destroy their formation. It's the same thing that the Muslims used against the Christians, the sort of feint retreat. Now, the Muslims were notorious at it, and if you study Byzantine history, it's quite irritating because over and over again, the Byzantines would engage with the Muslims. The Muslims are incredible horseback riders, the Arabs, and then they would do these feint retreats to get the Byzantines to pull their formation forward so that they could basically fall into a trap, as I said, and that worked over and over and over again against the Byzantines. But Constantine had really great military tactics and was incredibly successful man at battle. So God bless him. Jay Hamza throws in 20. Thank you so much, Jay. He says, "I'm amazed at how these saints' lives, the way is preserved to find Christ as they did. What would befall a man if left to his own devices? Does death not follow suit?" Yeah, great question. And thank you so much for the support, Jay. Really appreciate that, my man. And Rough Hands, been a COTEL crew member for 24 months. So thank you so much, Rough Hands. He says, let's go. Thank you so much, Rough Hands, for the support. Really appreciate that. Oh, and Bruce Roberts throws in 20. He says, Christos Anesti, Alithos Anesti. Thank you so much, Bruce. Really appreciate the support, my brother. And let me just check over here. Okay. So let's listen to this video here about the Edict of Milan and its kind of importance and it paving the way for Rome to become Christian.
His conversion was nothing more than a politically
I always gotta slow these things down.
motivated calculation. In 313, Constantine, now a Western emperor, met with his Eastern counterpart Licinius. Together, they agreed to the Edict of Milan, a groundbreaking proclamation for freedom of worship to all people. This proclamation effectively legalized Christianity as a religion, allowing Christians to organize their worship as they saw fit. The edict also returned all property confiscated during the recent persecutions, a sign of things to come. Although the empire's western and eastern halves enjoyed a time of limited peace, factionalism was never far away in the Roman Empire. Relations between Constantine and Licinius deteriorated. In 320, Licinius resumed his persecution of Christians, effectively culminating in a renewed civil war by 324, in which Constantine triumphed to emerge as sole Roman emperor. He reunited the empire under the banner of Christianity. Constantine attributed all of his success to Christianity, writing that he had been chosen as God's instrument for the suppression of impiety, and dubbing himself the equal of the apostles. The triumphal arch built at Rome attributed his victories to the inspiration of the divinity. However, Constantine also ensured that plenty of credit went to his own military genius. In a letter to the Persian king, he asserted that God had chosen him to bring peace and prosperity to all lands, and that it was his ambition to do so. Seeing it his duty to propagate the true religion, he had no qualms about using his imperial position to further Christianity's cause. Many have questioned Constantine's commitment to the faith, though there is even more evidence in letters to Christian clergy that suggest Constantine was sincere. Indeed, Eusebius, Constantine's biographer and most prominent source, insisted that the emperor believed he had a special relationship with the Christian God. In any case, Constantine did his bit to remove the empire's impiety and unify the state through Christianity. Crucifixion, sexual immorality, prostitution, pagan sacrifice, and gladiatorial shows were all abolished. He also glorified Christianity through his building works. The Church of the Holy Apostles was built in Byzantium, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was erected in Jerusalem. In Rome, the Church of St. Peter was handsomely decorated to reflect its importance. In his reign, Constantine also established influence over the Holy Church itself, weighing in on debates over the true nature of the religion. Wanting a unanimous position on the divine nature of Christ, Constantine summoned a group of church officials to the Council of Nicaea in 325. From the meeting came the Nicene Creed, which established that Jesus was in fact a divine being. Constantine hoped and urged church officials to accept the council's conclusions, though violent struggles over the questions raised continued to cause tension within the empire. Although Constantine seems to have been a popular ruler, he didn't have everything his way. During a visit to Rome to celebrate the 20th anniversary of his victory and the beginning of his reign, Constantine refused to participate in a pagan procession. This offended the Romans and was indicative of the broader religious spectrum still evident within the empire. Around the same time, Constantine had his wife, Fausta, and his son, Crispus, executed for treason.
And so that's why I said I was just going to play a section of this video, because Constantine did not have Chrysippus killed for treason. It was Fausta who did it behind his back, and that's why he killed Fausta. So whoever made this video at least got that part wrong.
Possibly even for adultery. The circumstances surrounding the executions are shrouded in mystery. New capital, Constantinople, at Byzantium, now modern-day Istanbul, as the Second Rome, rebuilding it to glorify the empire. As with many cases for Constantine, the decision to move the capital was practical and emotional. From a military perspective, Constantine realized it would be easier to defend against attacks from the east and protect valuable lands in Egypt if he moved his capital to a more defensible eastern position. Constantine rebuilt on a monumental scale. He offered free bread and full citizenship as an enticing welcoming offer to encourage high-ranking men to move there with their families. Churches popped up all over the city, as Christians were naturally welcomed. Yet it should be noted that religious tolerance was not extended to all. Persecution of the Jews, the Christ killers, as Constantine saw them, intensified during his reign.
And what can you say?
Nevertheless, the city tripled in size over this rebuilding period. Constantine also built huge legislative halls and an enormous palace to establish the necessary gravitas for the new capital. This was a concerted attempt to shift the center of power away from the empire's emotional heart, Rome. Ultimately, Constantinople did eclipse Rome. Rome fell as the Western Empire crumbled in the late 5th century, and the Byzantine Empire, centered around Constantinople, continued to thrive. Constantine died in 337 AD. His legacy is inextricably linked to his reform of the Roman Empire's religious picture, and indeed the history of Christianity following his conversion. Unfortunately, this makes it difficult to assess his rule more widely, whether or not he was an able politician, a great military commander, or a kind and honorable ruler. Because of his reform's polarizing nature, contemporary sources must be taken with a pinch of salt. Before and after his reign, Christian scholars venerated him as a protector, a wise guiding hand. Many contemporary sources represent little more than state propaganda. Some historical writings are even thought to be in the emperor's own hand. Conversely, Constantine critics were often his political enemies who wished to continue following the pagan religion. They were quick to judge his conversion to Christianity harshly, claiming it led to the empire's downfall in the long run. Whatever the truth, there seems to be a distinction in Constantine's legacy. It is not merely the conversion and protection of Christianity that is important, but the Christianization of the Roman culture alongside the upper class's classical culture. This essentially paved the way for the growth of Western medieval culture in the following centuries. To learn more about
And, you know, some of the important places I mentioned earlier, the Church of the Holy Apostles, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of St. Irene, the building of the original Hagia Sophia. So it's obviously, it's the original version. It's later rebuilt in its full grandeur under Justinian I, Emperor Justinian. But it's Constantine who actually builds the original Hagia Sophia. So there are so many churches, so many important historical sites. And again, Saint Helen, his mother, she is credited with finding the true cross of Christ during her sort of expedition to the Holy Land. So just an incredibly important person in history, let alone he's a saint and given the title equal to the apostles. Of course, he claimed that himself during his lifetime, but it's been accepted by the church because of the importance. If the apostles spread Christianity within the Roman Empire to essentially the age of martyrdom, the first 300 years, it's Constantine that takes Christianity and spreads it to the entire world by making it the official religion of the Roman Empire. So the convening of the Council of Nicaea, the battle at the Milvian Bridge, the Edict of Milan, the building of Constantinople, the rededicating the empire. I mean, Constantine is absolutely an incredibly important figure. And, you know, glory to God to him, glory to God to St. Helena, memory eternal to both of them. So their feast day, as I said, is May 21st, and the celebration of the dedication of Constantinople is May 11th. So very important, times on the calendar this next month are coming up regarding Constantine and some of his legacy. So anyways, that's going to do the stream today, guys. I just want to double check on the super chats. Looks like 2 came in over on Streamlabs, or 1 was from the last stream with Father Gabriel on divorce. And Quiet Guy during that last stream sent in a super chat that says, DPH, I come from a divorced family. but I eventually got married. I did lots of modern therapy and it worked. I believe in God. I listened to a lot of Rollo Tomasi, and it's helped me navigate marriage. But above all, I believe in and love God. Well, glory to God, Quiet Guy. Thank you so much for that support, man. Really appreciate it. And that's wonderful that you've been able to kind of come around from the trauma of your parents' divorce and be in a healthy and thriving marriage. Alula throws in 5 and says, Christ is risen. DPH, I was received in the Orthodox Church this Pascha. Glory to God. Under the Antiochian Diocese in the U.S., this wouldn't have been possible without you and Jay. Thank you for everything. Well, glory to God. I'm humble if I helped in any way, Alula. That's excellent, excellent news. So glory to God for your conversion and welcome home. Welcome home. Anyways, that looks like it. That is going to do. Yeah, I thought Slow Voice. I thought Rollo Tomasi was against marriage. I think he claims he's in a happy, loving marriage, and that marriage is good for him. But generally speaking, I think he does caution young men to get married based on the way that our court system works right now, divorce, alimony, all that different stuff. So anyway, so be it. But Quiet Guy, that's wonderful that that you found useful information. And Austin DeTulio throws in a generous $20, says, dang, I just tuned in. Well, thank you so much, Austin, for the support. Really appreciate it. Do go back and check out the stream. I thought, I mean, what do you guys think? What are your guys' thoughts of St. Constantine? I thought it was an incredible stream. Major thank you again goes out to Leon, who sponsored today's stream. Leon asked for an overview, the importance of St. Constantine, his life and legacy. And I told him, he thought, he reached out to me. He said, do you think this would be a good sponsored stream before he purchased? I said, absolutely. I can't believe I haven't done a stream on St. Constantine yet. And so really thankful to Leon for supporting the work and sponsoring today's stream. And so, yeah, Slow Boy says, St. Constantine, pray for us. Absolutely. Intercede, St. Helen and St. Constantine, intercede for us, please. But as I said, I thought it connected because during Pascha night, someone asked me, what is the most important battle? In my opinion, they were talking, is it the Battle of Hastings? Which individual battle is one of the most important? I said, it's the battle at the Milvian Bridge. Without that, there is no orthodoxy. There is no Byzantine Empire. I mean, there would still be orthodoxy. I mean, but without the councils, without Constantine, convening the Council of Nicaea, the formation of the church and the clarification of the dogmas and the doctrines, I think it would have been more difficult. And so you can't help but see in the life of St. Constantine, providence, Christian providence, the providence for Christian history, the providence for our church and our faith. So, as I said, glory to God to St. Constantine. I think he's one of the most incredible saints, and it's unfortunate that there's so many critics within Christianity. It's mostly Protestants and stuff, but there's all these conspiracy theories about Constantine never actually converting, not being sincere. I've heard weird arguments that Constantine created the Bible. He chose the books. It's like, what? No. Do you know anything about history? So anyways, Jay Hamza throws in 5. He says, I want to say critics often point a finger before reflecting on the lives of themselves. True, very true. Don't be quick to hasten your demise, so they do as well. Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think Constantine is such a unique figure, right? Born to a single peasant mother, later reclaimed by his biological father to inherit the power of him, Constantius, his father, becoming Caesar of the Western Roman Empire during, killing his second wife, who lies about his son of his first marriage, that wife died during childbirth. That Chrysippus was essentially raised by his mother, Saint Helen, one of his closest figures in his entire life. His wife then says that his son's trying to get with her and sleep with her, locks up his son before he can talk with her. His second wife kills him. He then tortures her and kills her. And then goes on to move the capital to Constantinople, sends his mother through the Holy Land, finds the cross, establishes all the churches we mentioned. Like just an incredible figure. And the the paradox of it all, that, yeah, he killed a lot of people. I mean, Constantine was a warrior saint, as we showed during the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. I mean, he literally rides on the front line with his cavalry in every battle that he was in. I mean, the dude, he was, courageous, brave, honorable warrior for sure. And so, yeah, he killed a lot of people, and in more of the controversial stuff, even after, his promotion of Christianity, even after being the sole emperor of Rome. Yeah, he killed people. And, one of the criticisms by those that like to screech about anti-Semitism is, as it showed, he persecuted Jews. He was not fond of Judaism as a religion. He was not fond of Jews. Had some thoughts about maybe machinations or attempts at subversion. And so, yeah, he persecuted Jews. He killed people that threatened his authority as emperor. And yet at the same time, Christianity in our history wouldn't exist without him. I mean, he is a monumental historical figure. So the irony is rich. The fact that, again, as the priest in our documentary highlighted, I mean, he literally went from child of a peasant woman to emperor of Rome and reorienting the entire empire. So incredible stuff. And Bruce Roberts throws in 5. Thank you so much, Bruce. He says, have you seen the new documentary on St. Moses the Black, a show by Martin Scorsese? No, I haven't seen. I saw something that Martin Scorsese, wasn't Fox News promoting it? Isn't like it on the Fox membership network or something, or the Fox network? I don't even know what it's called, but I have not watched it. Do you recommend Bruce Roberts? You recommend the documentary? I was skeptical because as soon as I hear Martin Scorsese, I believe he's a Catholic, but I become immediately skeptical as soon as I heard that. So I don't know if it's good or not. But, yeah, St. Moses the Black is absolutely based, as Vigo says. But no, I haven't seen that. Has anybody else in the chat seen him? Anybody watch this documentary? So anyways, Bruce, I appreciate that. No, I have not seen it. But I do appreciate the support. And okay, Austin DeTulio says he hasn't seen it. So yeah, I was skeptical, but if Bruce, if you recommend checking it out, I'll see, probably a way to pirate it. I'm not paying Fox News to watch the documentary. That's beyond my principles, but I will figure out a way to check it out. I'm sure it's already been pirated in one way or another. Bruce said it's funny. So I'll check it out, Bruce. I'm not familiar. Maybe it's something good to cover on one of the streams or something. So anyways, thank you guys so much. Smash that like. Again, a major appreciation goes out to Leon for sponsoring today's stream. And if there's a stream topic that you would like to sponsor, please do so with the following link right here. You go ahead and purchase, and I'll email you. And you can let me know what the kind of topic or stream is that you'd be interested in. I'd be happy to go back and forth and work something out. So thank you again to Leon. Thank you to everybody who sponsored a stream. Thank you to everyone who supported today's stream. God bless you all. Christ is risen. And I wish you guys the absolute best. So I will see you guys in the next one, which will be Thursday or Friday. So as always, until then, God bless.